The world for me had shrunk to the four beige walls of this private hospital room. My universe was a symphony of sterile sounds. The relentless metric beep of the heart monitor that tethered me to the living, the soft hiss of oxygen through a plastic tube, the quiet squeak of a nurse's shoes in the hallway. Over it all hung the cloying scent of antiseptic, a chemical blanket that tried and failed to smother the underlying odor of sickness, of a body slowly surrendering to itself. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors had delivered the diagnosis with a gentle, practiced sorrow, calling it a swift and silent thief. It had stolen my future, leaving me with a present measured in morphine drips and whispered goodbyes. But my focus was not on my own ending. My gaze, softened by the drugs but sharpened by a mother's love, was fixed on the two small bursts of life, chasing each other around the foot of my bed, Cora and Leo, my 5-year-old twins. They were the only part of my life that remained pure, untouched by the filth of betrayal. Cora, with my own raven hair and a spirit crackling with fiery determination, paused her game to stick her tongue out at her brother. Leo, a quieter soul with his father's contemplative blue eyes and a heart as gentle as a new dawn, simply giggled and dodged behind a chair. They were my masterpiece, my legacy. They were the reason I was still breathing, the reason I was still fighting, though the battlefield had been reduced to this sterile, white-sheeted square. Their father, Richard Stanton, was already gone. Not from cancer, but from the sudden, shocking brutality of a massive coronary 3 months prior. He had been a titan of the financial world, a man whose name was synonymous with ruthless success. To the world, he was a genius. To me, he had become a stranger long before his heart gave out on the 17th hole of the Oakwood Country Club, a ghost haunting the sprawling mansion we no longer shared in spirit. The space he had vacated in our lives had been quickly and garishly filled by her, Tiffany Croft. She was standing by the window now, tapping impatiently on her phone. Her stiletto heels, absurd for a hospital, had clicked a sharp, impatient rhythm against the linoleum when she'd first swept in. She wore a tight leopard print dress, a wildly inappropriate choice that seemed to scream defiance against the solemn atmosphere. Her perfume, a heavy floral scent, waged a losing war against the room's sterile air, creating a nauseating cocktail that stung my nostrils. 10 years my junior, with bottle blonde hair, and a face that was a testament to the finest cosmetic procedures money could buy, she had been Richard's executive assistant. It was a poorly veiled secret, the subject of citywide gossip for the last 2 years. After Richard's death, Tiffany had shed no tears. Instead, she had moved into the Stanton mansion with the speed of a conquering army, her lawyers flanking her like stormtroopers. She treated me not as the grieving widow and mother of Richard's children, but as a temporary, inconvenient tenant whose lease was about to expire. "The lawyer is on his way," Tiffany announced, her voice clipped, her eyes still glued to the screen of her phone. "Mr. Davies. He says the final reading of the will can be expedited, given your condition." The words hung in the air, dripping with a false sympathy that was more insulting than open hostility. I offered a weak, tired nod, a gesture that cost me a surprising amount of energy. I had already seen the will. Richard, in a fit of passion, or perhaps sheer, calculated cruelty, had shown it to me months before he died. He had left me a token spousal allowance, an insult disguised as a pittance. The rest, the entire Stanton fortune, was to go to Tiffany. The real estate, the stock portfolio, the controlling interest in Stanton Enterprises. Everything, the twins, his own flesh and blood, were not even mentioned. It was a final, brutal act of erasure. "That's good," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. Cora, sensing my distress with the unerring radar of a loving child, stopped her game and ran to my bedside. "Mommy, are you sad?" she asked, her small, warm hand covering my frail, cool one. I summoned a smile that felt like lifting a mountain. "Never sad when I have you, my little star," I said, stroking her dark, silky hair. Noah came over too, leaning his head against the bed rail, his blue eyes wide with a worry he couldn't yet articulate. I saw Tiffany watch the scene from the corner of my eye. Her lip curled just slightly, a flicker of disgust in her eyes. To her, the children were just complications, loose ends. She had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with them once I was gone. A few weeks ago, I had overheard her speaking to a nurse in the hallway, her voice a careless, sharp whisper that had sliced right through me. "There'll be a matter for social services, I suppose," she had said with a flippant shrug. "It's not my responsibility." That comment, that casual, cruel dismissal of my children's future. It was in that moment that the desperate, audacious plan that had been a faint whisper in my mind began to take root and grow, thorny and resolute. For weeks I had lain in this bed, a prisoner of my own body, my sharp intellect a caged lion pacing behind tired eyes. I had been playing the part of the defeated, dying wife perfectly. I had allowed Tiffany to believe she had won, that I was a footnote, a tragic but ultimately irrelevant figure in the grand drama of the Stanton inheritance. She saw a dying woman. She had no idea she was looking at a grandmaster in the final moves of a game where the prize was everything that mattered. My gaze drifted to the small, worn, leather-bound address book on my nightstand. There was only one number I needed, one name I had been holding in reserve like a secret weapon. A name from a past Tiffany knew nothing about, a past where I was not just Eleanor Stanton, the wife, but Eleanor Vance, a force to be reckoned with. "I can't stand this smell," Tiffany declared abruptly, slipping her phone into her designer handbag. "I'm going down to the cafeteria for a decent coffee. Try not to, you know." She waved a vague hand in my direction before turning and clicking her way out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, a profound silence fell, broken only by the beep of the monitor and Leo's soft humming. This was my chance. With an effort that sent a tremor through my arm, I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My fingers, now so thin and frail, fumbled with the buttons. I took a deep, rattling breath, ignoring the sharp pain in my side, and dialed the number from memory. It rang 3 times before a deep, calm voice answered. "Coleman." A wave of relief so potent it felt like a dose of medicine washed over me. "Julian," I rasped, my voice cracking. "It's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance Stanton." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of stunned silence. Then, the tone shifted from professional to deeply personal, laced with a concern that was blessedly real. "Ellie? My God. I heard you were unwell. Where are you?" "Street Jude's, room 412, I said, a sliver of my old strength returning to my voice. "And Julian, I'm out of time. I need your help. Not as a friend. I need the judge." Julian's voice, thick with a concern that was a balm on my raw nerves, transported me back decades. It was a voice that belonged to sun-dappled porches and the scent of freshly cut grass. A voice from a time before the towering glass edifice of Stanton Enterprises had cast its long, cold shadow over my life. Before I was Mrs. Stanton, a name that had become a gilded cage, I was Eleanor Vance, and in that name there was power. As I lay there, the sterile room faded away, replaced by the memory of my father's study. It smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. He was a shrewd, kind man who had built a modest but solid real estate business on the foundations of integrity and foresight. Julian Hayes, then a brilliant young lawyer, had been his protege, his dearest friend's son whom he treated as his own. The two of them would sit for hours, debating law and life, and I, a precocious teenager, would listen from the doorway, soaking it all in. "Your greatest asset, Ellie," my father once told me, tapping a finger against his temple, "is not the money I'll leave you. It's this, your mind. Money can be lost, but a sharp mind, a strategic mind, can build empires from ash." End up. When he and my mother were killed in a car accident during my final year of university, their loss was a chasm that threatened to swallow me whole. But their legacy was twofold. A substantial inheritance of $250,000, and my father's words, which became my guiding principle. I graduated at the top of my class in economics, my grief fueling a fierce ambition. I wasn't going to be a woman who lived off a dead man's fortune. I was going to be a woman who built her own. Then I met Richard Stanton. He was an electric charge in human form. Brash, charismatic, with a vision so vast it was almost arrogant. He spoke of algorithms and market predictions with a religious fervor that was utterly intoxicating. He was all engine and no brakes, a rocket without a launch pad. I was captivated. And he, in turn, was captivated by my mind, by the way I could challenge his assumptions and refine his chaotic brilliance into a workable strategy, and of course, by my capital. "We can build an empire, Ellie," he'd said one evening, his blue eyes blazing with conviction as he spread makeshift charts across the floor of my small apartment. "Stanton Financial Solutions. We'll be pioneers." He had the vision. I had the foundation. It was my inheritance, the $250,000, that became the entirety of the company's seed funding. I wasn't just investing in his idea, I was investing in us. I was his first investor, his only investor, his partner. The articles of incorporation were drawn up on May 12th, 22 years ago. The corporation was authorized to issue 1,000 shares of common stock. The initial issuance was clear: 500 shares to Richard Charles Stanton, in consideration of services rendered and future services to be performed, and 500 shares to Eleanor Annalise Vance, in consideration of a capital investment of $250,000. I remember holding the document, the crisp paper feeling heavy with promise. Prescott Vance Financial, I had suggested we call it. A true partnership. Richard had smiled, a tight, unreadable expression on his face. "Let's keep it simple for now," he'd said. "Stanton has a stronger ring to it." I let it go. It seemed a small concession at the time. The real test came a week before our wedding. We were deliriously happy, dizzy with love and the thrill of our new venture. He came to me one evening, holding a document and a pen. "It's just a formality, Ellie," he said, his voice casual, almost breezy. "My lawyers think it would be cleaner, look better to future investors if there was one clear owner. This just transfers your shares to me for $1. It'll all be ours anyway, once we're married." I stared at the paper. A simple transfer agreement. All my leverage, all my foundational power, to be signed away for a single dollar and a promise. A cold knot formed in my stomach. And then, as clearly as if he were standing right beside me, I heard my father's voice. "Never give away the foundation of your own house, Ellie, no matter how much you love the man you invite to live in it." "I can't sign this, Richard," I said, my voice quiet but firm. His smile vanished. "What do you mean you can't? It's for the good of the company, of our company. You're asking me to give away my entire inheritance. The legacy from my grandparents, from my parents. I trust you with my life, with my heart. But this is different. This is mine." We had a terrible fight. He called me untrusting, accused me of not believing in him. The words stung, cutting deeper, because a part of me felt guilty. But the core of my resolve, the foundation my father had helped me build, held firm. I refused. In the end, we reached a compromise. A deal struck in the tense silence of a late-night argument, a deal that would define the rest of our lives. He would run the company. In public, it would be his. He would be the face, the genius, the titan. I would be his silent partner. The ownership would remain as it was, 50/50. He would manage my investment, build with it, but the ownership would remain mine, under my maiden name. For years, it worked. I raised our children, I hosted the dinner parties, stood elegantly by his side at galas, and supported his career. Our investment grew beyond our wildest dreams. Stanton Financial Solutions became Stanton Enterprises, a billion-dollar behemoth. But success is a corrosive acid. It slowly ate away at the man I had loved. He started to believe his own publicity. He forgot the woman who had provided the launch pad. The 500 shares in my maiden name, tucked away in a safe deposit box, became a silent testament to a truth he chose to ignore. He forgot I wasn't just his wife. I was his co-founder. When he met Tiffany, he had forgotten me completely. He drafted that will, attempting to give away what was never his to give. He was so arrogant, so consumed by his own myth, that he never imagined I would ever call in the debt. He saw me as weak, a society wife with no head for business. And Tiffany? She had simply followed his lead, seeing the same pathetic relic he saw. What was I to do? Fight with a man I once loved? Tear our family apart while our children were young? No. I kept my peace. I held my power in reserve, not for my own sake, but as the ultimate insurance policy. An insurance policy for Cora and Leo. And now, the policy was due to be cashed in. My mind snapped back to the present, to the phone pressed against my ear, to Julian's concerned voice on the other end. The journey through the past had not been a diversion. It had been a sharpening of the blade. The weakness I felt was in my body, not my mind. My mind was crystal clear. The past was a memory. Now, it had to become a weapon. Julian, I said, and my voice was no longer a weak rasp. It was quiet, but it was steel. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have a plan. I have a plan, I repeated, and the words seemed to clear the fog of pain and fatigue from my mind, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. The beep of the heart monitor was no longer a countdown to my death, but the ticking of a clock towards my final, most important act. There was a weighty silence on the other end of the line. Julian was a man of the law, a man of process and precedent. He was not a man given to rash decisions or dramatic gestures. I knew I couldn't just appeal to his heart. I had to appeal to his intellect, his sense of order, and his unshakable integrity. It begins with Richard's will, Julian. I started, my voice gaining strength with every word. It's exactly as the gossip columns would have dreamed. He left me a pittance, an allowance designed to humiliate. He left the children, his children, nothing. Not a mention, not a trust fund, not a single dollar. He erased them. Everything, the entire estate, the company, the house they live in, he gave it all to Tiffany Croft. I let that sink in, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. I could practically hear the gears turning in Julian's mind, the judge in him analyzing the legal, if not moral, validity of such a document. But that's not the worst of it, I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, raw with a fury I'd kept suppressed for weeks. I heard her, Julian. I heard her telling a nurse they'd be a matter for social services. She intends to cast them off the moment I am gone, like unwanted baggage. She would see my children, Richard's children, swallowed by the foster care system, while she redecorates their bedrooms and spends their father's fortune on new jewelry. Another silence, this one more charged than the last. It was no longer a legal problem. It was a moral abomination. Ellie, that's monstrous, he finally said, the professional calm in his voice cracking to reveal the compassionate man beneath. But what can be done? A will is a will, unless he was of unsound mind. He was of sound mind, I cut in, just a corrupt heart. Fighting the will would take years, money, and energy I do not have. By the time it was settled, the damage to Cora and Leo would be irreparable. No, Julian, we can't fight his will. We have to make it irrelevant. And to do that, I need you. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gathering all my remaining strength for the request that would either set my entire plan in motion or cause it to collapse before it even began. I want you to become the legal guardian of my children. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound, I thought, for a terrifying moment, that the line had gone dead. I could hear the faint echo of my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic. Eleanor, he finally spoke, and his voice was strained, heavy with disbelief. That is a massive, serious step. Guardianship is a complex legal process. It's handled through family court, through wills, through extensive paperwork and review. It's not something a sitting superior court judge simply does on a personal request. Oh, he was right, of course. He was laying out the rule book, the very book he had built his life around. Now I had to convince him to set it aside. I have no one else, Julian, I pleaded, letting the raw desperation seep into my voice. It wasn't an act. Richard's family hasn't spoken to me in a decade. My own family is gone. You are the only one. I know it's unorthodox. I know I am asking you to step far outside the bounds of your normal duties. But the situation is not normal. That woman, Tiffany, is a predator. She will see my children as a liability, a loose end to be tied up and discarded. I coughed then, a deep, rattling sound that shook my small frame and left me gasping for air. The nurse's station buzzed outside my door. Time was running out, not just in days, but in minutes. I'm not asking for this because you are my father's friend, I continued, pressing on through the pain. I'm asking because of who you are. You are the one man in this city whom her money and influence cannot touch. Her lawyers are sharks, but they are gnats to you. You are the only person who can build a shield around my children so high and so strong that she can never, ever reach them. She can't challenge you. She can't intimidate you. With you as their guardian, they become untouchable. I paused, letting the logic of my argument settle in. I had appealed to his sense of morality. Now I was appealing to his very nature as a bastion of justice. My father trusted you, Julian, I whispered, playing my final, most precious card. He made you promise, on that old porch, to look out for me. I'm not asking for myself anymore. I'm asking for them. I'm asking you to fulfill that promise. Protect his grandchildren. I heard a long, slow exhale on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a man at war with himself. The judge versus the friend, the letter of the law versus its spirit. I pictured him in his chambers, surrounded by the weight of the law, the mahogany and leather-bound books, and I held my breath. "All right, Ellie," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion he could no longer conceal. The use of my old nickname, the name he'd used when I was just a girl listening from the doorway, undid me. "All right, I'll do it." Oh. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped my eye and traced a path down my hollow cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of victory. The first, most critical piece of the puzzle had just snapped into place. The shield was rising. "Thank you," I breathed, the relief so overwhelming it almost buckled me. "Thank you, Julian." But there was no time to waste on sentiment. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. My mind was already moving to the next step, the one that would spring the trap. "Now," I said, my voice steady once more, the commander back in control of her battlefield. "Now for the second part." "Good," I said, a surge of adrenaline momentarily overriding the morphine's dull, heavy pull. My mind, which had felt like a clouded sky for so many weeks, was now a panorama of crystalline clarity. Every move was mapped, every contingency considered. Now for the second part. "I need you to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock sharp, and it must be in your chambers." "My chambers?" Julian's voice was a mixture of confusion and caution. "Ellie, a will reading is a private matter, usually held at the lawyer's office. To convene it in a judge's official chambers is highly irregular." "It must be there, Julian," I insisted, my voice leaving no room for argument. "It must be on your ground, under the official seal of your court. The setting is everything. I need the weight of the law to be a physical presence in that room. I need her to feel it. It is the only way this will work." I could feel him contemplating the request, weighing the breach of protocol against the urgency in my voice. He was trusting me, flying blind on the strength of a promise made long ago, and the desperation he heard in me now. "Who do you want there?" he asked, the practical tone telling me he had already acquiesced. "Everyone," I said. "Me. The children, Tiffany and her lawyer, of course, and Mr. Davies, the Stanton family lawyer, and Julian. This is the most important part. You must instruct Mr. Davies to bring the complete corporate formation documents for Stanton Enterprises. Everything. The original articles of incorporation, the initial share issuance records, all of it, from the very beginning. The founding documents? Ellie, that's ancient history. What relevance could they possibly have?" "Just trust me," I whispered, the effort of the conversation beginning to drain me completely. The edges of my vision were starting to blur. "Tell him it is a final request from me, to ensure all assets are properly accounted for. He is a man of procedure. He will comply. Please, Julian. It's everything." "I'll make the calls," he assured me, his voice a solid, comforting anchor. "We'll convene at 10 a.m. sharp. I'll arrange for a court bailiff to assist you at the hospital." "Thank you," I breathed, sinking back against the pillows, my body feeling like a hollowed-out shell. As my eyes fluttered shut, I murmured one last thing, so quietly he had to strain to hear it. "You are a good man, Julian Hayes." The rest of the afternoon was a flurry of controlled activity. Immediately after my call with Julian, I pressed the button for my nurse. Her name was Maria, a kind, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who had shown me more genuine compassion in the past few weeks than I had received from my husband in the past decade. "Maria," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I need your help with something. It's a legal matter. I understand you are also a notary public." She nodded, her expression professionally placid, but her eyes full of sympathy. "I am. What do you need, Mrs. Stanton?" "I need to dictate my last will and testament," I said, "and I need you and another nurse to witness it." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. This was, after all, a place of endings. She was accustomed to last requests. She retrieved the necessary forms and another nurse, a young man named Ben. As they stood by my bedside, I began to dictate. My will was not a document of vengeance, but of protection. It was simple, precise, and absolute. I bequeathed a few personal items to Maria and Ben as thanks for their kindness. I left my personal jewelry, what little of it was truly mine, and not just on loan from the Stanton corporate vault to my daughter Cora. I left my collection of first edition books on economics to my son Leo, hoping that one day he might understand the part of me that existed before I was just his mother. Then came the heart of it, the clause that would change everything. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my personal estate, I dictated, my voice clear and steady, including but not limited to my 5 million shares of common stock in the corporation known as Stanton Enterprises. I give, devise, and bequeath to a trust fund to be established for the sole benefit of my children, Cora Van Stanton and Leo Van Stanton. I paused, taking a breath. This trust is to be managed and administered until my children reach the age of 25 by a single appointed trustee. I looked Maria directly in the eye, and I hereby appoint the Honorable Judge Arthur Coleman as that sole trustee. I had done it. I had forged the final link in the chain. The shield of guardianship was now fused with the sword of ownership. After they had signed and the document was notarized, a profound peace settled over me. The heavy burden of fear I had been carrying for months finally lifted. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever happened to my failing body, I knew I had done everything humanly possible to secure their future. The stage was set, the actors were summoned, the script for the final act was written. That night, as Cora and Leo slept in cots the hospital had kindly provided, I didn't sleep. I watched them. I watched the gentle rise and fall of their small chests, the way Cora's brow furrowed in a dream, the way Leo's thumb was tucked just beside his lips. I memorized the unique silhouette of their sleeping faces in the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the window. I inhaled the sweet, milky scent of their hair. I was not just saying goodbye. I was engraving them onto my soul, ensuring that when I walked into that room tomorrow, I would be carrying them with me. I was not just Eleanor, the dying woman. I was Cora and Leo's mother, and I was about to unleash a mother's love in all its righteous, devastating fury. Getting me to Julian's chambers the next morning was an ordeal. It required a special transport ambulance, a wheelchair, a portable oxygen tank, and the steady, professional presence of Maria. Each bump in the road, each jostle of the wheelchair, sent a fresh wave of pain through my body, but it was a distant signal, a storm raging on a faraway coast. My entire consciousness was focused, honed to a diamond-sharp point on the mahogany table that awaited me. Julian's chambers felt less like an office and more like a temple dedicated to the solemnity of justice. Centuries of legal wisdom were bound in leather on the walls, and the air itself seemed heavy with the gravity of decisions made within them. I sat at the head of the long, imposing table, looking impossibly small and frail in my wheelchair, yet I felt a sense of belonging. This was my battlefield. Here, the truth was the ultimate authority. Cora and Leo sat on small chairs beside me, clutching crayons and paper provided by a kind-hearted bailiff. They were quiet, their usual boisterous energy subdued by the imposing room and the palpable tension they were too young to understand, but too perceptive to ignore. Tiffany Croft arrived 5 minutes late, a deliberate power move. She swept in dressed in a sharp black power suit that screamed money and ambition. She gave me a cursory, pitying glance and shot a look of pure annoyance at the children, as if their very presence were a personal affront. Her lawyer, A slick man with a reptilian smile and hair gelled to a perfect sheen followed in her wake. Mr. Davies, the portly and nervous Prescott family lawyer, was already seated, clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest, as if it contained state secrets. Finally, Julian entered. He wore his black judicial robe, not as a costume, but as a mantle of the authority vested in him. He didn't sit behind his large desk, but took the chair opposite me, positioning himself not as a distant authority, but as a moderator. His gaze swept over the room, calm and commanding, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Tiffany's smug face. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice filling the room, silencing the rustle of papers. "Mrs. Stanton has requested this formal setting due to the gravity of the circumstances. We are here for two purposes. First, to address the matter of the Stanton children, Olivia and Noah." Tiffany rolled her eyes, a small, barely perceptible motion of contempt. "And second," Julian continued, his eyes locking onto hers, "to hear the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Stanton." He then gestured to me. With a weak but steady hand, I pushed a signed and notarized document across the polished surface of the table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Tiffany. "Effective immediately," I announced, my voice surprisingly firm, the words resonating in the quiet room. "I am relinquishing my parental rights and granting full legal guardianship of my children, Cora Vance Stanton and Leo Vance Stanton, to Judge Julian Hayes." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint scratching of Cora's red crayon on paper. Tiffany let out a short, incredulous laugh. What? You're just giving them away? To him?" She looked at Julian as if he were part of some bizarre conspiracy. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered, "It's irregular, but if she's of sound mind and he accepts, it's likely legal. It actually solves a problem for us." The expression on Tiffany's face shifted instantly from disbelief to smug satisfaction. This was perfect, better than she could have imagined. The dying wife was not only removing herself from the picture, but she was taking the children with her. A clean sweep. Julian picked up the document, reviewed it with a grave expression, and nodded. "I have been advised of Mrs. Stanton's wishes, and I have accepted this solemn responsibility. The court will ratify this transfer of guardianship. Cora and Leo are now, for all legal intents and purposes, my wards." He looked at the twins, and a softness entered his gaze that no one else in the room received. "You will be safe," he said to them. "You will be cared for." I closed my eyes for a moment, a wave of profound relief washing over me. The first part of my mission was accomplished. The shield was in place. My children were now protected by the one man Tiffany's money and influence could never touch. "Well," Tiffany said, clapping her hands together lightly, a gesture of finality. "Since that little family matter is settled, shall we get to the main event, Mr. Davies?" Mr. Davies, sweating slightly under Julian's impassive gaze, cleared his throat. He opened his briefcase and produced a thick, ribbon-tied document. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Charles Stanton, signed and dated 11 months ago," he began, his voice a dry monotone. The language was dense and full of legalese, but the intent was brutally clear. There were a few minor bequests to distant relatives and a donation to his alma mater. Then came the heart of it. "To my wife, Eleanor Vance Stanton," Davies read, "in recognition of our years together, I bequeath a spousal allowance of $25,000 per year for the remainder of her natural life." Tiffany couldn't suppress a smirk. It was a pittance, a calculated insult designed to humiliate me one last time from beyond the grave. Davies droned on. "All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath to my dear friend and trusted partner, Miss Tiffany Croft." He went on to list the major assets. The Stanton Mansion on Ridgeview Drive, valued at $12 million, the penthouse apartment in the city, the collection of classic cars, and most importantly, Richard's entire personal shareholding in Stanton Enterprises, a 60% stake that gave the holder ironclad control of the billion-dollar company. When he finished reading, a triumphant silence filled the room. Tiffany sat back in her chair, a look of pure, unadulterated victory on her face. She had it all. The money, the power, the company. She had won. She looked across the table at the pale, dying woman who had just signed her own children away. I could almost feel the pity radiating from her, not for my loss, but for what she perceived as my weakness. A tragedy, of course, she said, her voice oozing insincere sympathy. But I will be sure to honor Richard's legacy. I will be an excellent steward of his company. I said nothing. I simply gave a slow, deliberate nod to Judge Julian Hayes. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now, it was time to spring it. Julian let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing Tiffany to bask in her perceived victory. Then he cleared his throat, a sound as sharp and commanding as the bang of a gavel. "Mr. Davies," Julian said, his tone shifting from passive observer to active participant. "That is indeed the will. However, a will can only dispense of property that the testator legally owns and has the right to bequeath." Tiffany's victorious smile faltered slightly. "What are you talking about? It was Richard's company. He built it." "Did he?" Julian asked, his eyes locking onto hers. "Did he build it alone?" "Mr. Davies, Mrs. Stanton's final request before this meeting was that you bring the original articles of incorporation for Stanton Enterprises, the founding documents. Do you have them?" Mr. Davies, looking increasingly distressed, nodded nervously. He fumbled inside his briefcase again, his hands trembling. He pulled out a much older, thinner file bound in faded blue cardstock. It looked insignificant next to the thick, ribbon-bound will. "These are the articles of incorporation for Stanton Financial Solutions, as it was originally named, filed with the Secretary of State on May 12th, 22 years ago." Davies confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. "Please read the section on initial share issuance," Julian commanded. Davies put on a pair of reading glasses and leaned over the old typewritten document. His eyes scanned the page, and a dawning horror spread across his face. He had been Richard's lawyer for 15 years, but he had never needed to consult a document this old. It was ancient history, or so he'd thought. "The corporation," he began to read, his voice shaky, "is authorized to issue 1,000 shares of common stock. The initial issuance is as follows: 500 shares to Richard Charles Stanton." He paused, swallowing hard. "Go on, Mr. Davies," I urged, my voice soft but insistent. His eyes darted between Tiffany, me, and the judge. He took a deep breath. "And 500 shares to Eleanor Annalise Vance." Tiffany shot up from her seat. "What? Vance? That was her maiden name." "In consideration of a capital investment of $250,000, constituting the entirety of the company's seed funding," Davies finished, the words falling like stones into the silent room. "Seed funding? What seed funding?" Tiffany stared, her perfectly made-up face a mask of confusion. "Richard said he started the company with a loan from his uncle." It was I who answered, my voice resonating with a strength that seemed impossible. "Richard's uncle gave him $5,000 and a pat on the back. The $250,000 was my inheritance from my parents. I was his first investor, his only investor. I was his partner." Tiffany's slick lawyer scoffed. "A partner? You were his wife. Under state law, that's marital property. It all goes into the same pot. The will still stands." "Not," Julian interjected, his voice cutting through the air like a blade, "if the shares were issued to Eleanor Vance before the marriage." "Mr. Davies, what is the date on that incorporation document?" Davies looked down, his face pale. "May 12th. "And what was the date of Richard and Eleanor Stanton's wedding?" Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. It was I who delivered the final devastating blow. "August 28th of that same year," I said, looking directly at Tiffany. "We got married 3 months after we founded the company together." The air went out of the room. Tiffany's lawyer stared, his mouth slightly agape as the legal implications crashed down on him. Property acquired before a marriage is not community or marital property. It is separate, personal property. My 500 shares, my 50% stake in the company, had been issued to me as a single woman, Eleanor Vance. They had never been Richard's. They had never been part of the marital estate. They were, and always had been, mine and mine alone. This is insane, Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. He ran that company for 22 years. He built it. He ran it very well, I agreed calmly. He was a brilliant CEO. That's what his 500 shares were for, his half. But he never owned my half. The share certificates have been in a safe deposit box in my maiden name for 22 years. Richard hadn't owned 60% of his company. He had only ever owned 50%. The will was attempting to give away property he never legally possessed. Tiffany stared at me, her mind reeling. The quiet, sick woman she had dismissed as a pathetic relic was suddenly a titan. A small, sad smile touched my lips. "Oh, you poor thing," I whispered, gathering my breath for the final move. "You still don't understand, do you? You haven't heard the final part of my will." From his own briefcase, Julian produced a single, crisp document. "I have here the last will and testament of Eleanor Van Stanton, dictated and signed yesterday," he announced, his voice resonating with official finality. "It contains only one significant clause." He looked directly at Tiffany, his gaze stripping away her last vestiges of defiance. "Eleanor Van Stanton bequeaths her entire personal estate, including her 5 million shares of common stock in the corporation known as Stanton Enterprises, to a trust fund." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final, crushing blow. "A trust fund established for the sole benefit of her children, Cora and Leo. A trust to be managed and administered by a single, appointed trustee." His eyes were as cold and hard as granite. "And she has appointed me, Julian Hayes, as that trustee." Checkmate. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, a gentle, benevolent heat that felt a world away from the chilling finality of that day in my chambers. 15 years had passed since Eleanor Van Stanton had drawn her last breath, a warrior on her chosen battlefield. I was retired now, the black robe hung in a closet, a relic of a former life. I walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from a misplaced battle with a garden hose, and my hair was entirely white. But the honor of fulfilling the promise I had made to Eleanor and to her father before her had been the defining endeavor of my life. I stood on the sun-drenched university quad, a sea of black gowns and triumphant shouts swirling around me. A young woman with Eleanor's raven hair and a fiery, confident smile broke away from the crowd and ran towards me, waving a diploma like a captured flag. "We did it, Uncle Julian!" Cora Stanton shouted, throwing her arms around me in a fierce hug. She smelled of sunshine and ambition. She had just graduated summa cum laude with a dual degree in finance and law, a combination of disciplines that was so perfectly Eleanor, it made my heart ache with a sweet, familiar pang. A few feet behind her, a tall, handsome young man with calm blue eyes and a gentle smile made his way over, a sketchbook tucked under his arm. "She means she did it," Leo Stanton said with a soft laugh. "I just provided the artistic encouragement and kept her supplied with coffee." He had become a gifted architectural designer, his quiet, contemplative nature finding its voice in the creation of beautiful, harmonious spaces. They were happy. More than that, they were brilliant, kind, and well-adjusted. I had raised them as my own with the help of a wonderful housekeeper, filling their lives with the love and stability their mother had so desperately wanted for them. The Stanton Trust, which I had administered with the ferocity of a mother bear, had provided them with every opportunity, funding their education and allowing them to pursue their passions without limitation. They knew the story of their mother's final act. I had told them when they were old enough to understand, framing it not as a tale of revenge, but as the ultimate story of a mother's fierce, strategic love. They saw her not as a victim, but as the brilliant architect of their salvation. And Tiffany Croft? She became a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered in boardrooms and at country clubs. She had fought just as Eleanor had predicted. For years, she had waged a bitter and costly legal war against me and the trust. She had tried to bleed the company dry, to liquidate assets, to force a buyout, but she was outmatched at every turn. I was on my home turf, armed with Eleanor's unimpeachable 50% stake and a judge's intimate knowledge of the law. I blocked her attempts to leverage debt. I challenged her executive appointments. I protected the company's value for its true heirs. Every board meeting was a stalemate, every decision a battle she could not win. The gilded cage Eleanor had designed had been brutally effective. Tiffany was trapped in a partnership with the man who was raising the children she despised, a man who held her in utter contempt. Eventually, worn down, hemorrhaging legal fees, and spiritually defeated, she had sold her 50% stake. A rival corporation, seeing an opportunity, acquired it for a fraction of its potential value. She walked away with a few $1 million of fortune to most, but a pittance compared to the empire she had lost. The last I heard, she was living in a condo in Florida, a bitter, lonely woman, forever haunted by the ghost of a fortune she had held in her grasp for a single, glorious moment before it turned to ash. Later that afternoon, the three of us stood in a quiet, peaceful cemetery. The chaos of the graduation ceremony had faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. We were in front of a simple marble headstone that read, Eleanor Vance Stanton, a mother, a founder, a guardian. Cora placed a bouquet of starlit lilies, her mother's favorite, on the grave. The white blossoms seemed to glow against the cool stone. She would be so proud of you, Cora, Leo said softly, placing an arm around his sister's shoulders. Cora looked from her brother to me, her eyes, so like her mother's, shining with unshed tears. She'd be proud of all of us, she corrected him, her voice thick with emotion. She won. She made sure we had a life. She made sure we had you. I felt my own composure crumble, and I put my arms around the two remarkable young adults my Ellie had entrusted to me. They were her legacy, her final, brilliant masterpiece. The long-ago promise I had made to her father on a summer afternoon had been the defining honor of my life. Eleanor's love had not died with her in that sterile hospital room. It had been an investment, the seed capital for the wonderful lives her children were now living. It had outlasted the betrayal, outmaneuvered the greed, and ultimately had proven to be the most powerful and enduring fortune of all. The architect of ruin for one had been the architect of salvation for two others. Her final will had been executed, not just in law, but in life. And standing there, between the two bright stars she had left behind, I knew with absolute certainty that her mission was, and forever would be, accomplished.